They put the human in the back row. Not out of politeness, though, that's what the instructor claimed, but because every species in the room was more comfortable with Theo Malik behind them, where they didn't have to meet his eyes or wonder what a mammal with no natural armor was doing in a class about apex predators. The Galactic Behavioral Integration Academy was known for many things: its multilateral peace accords, its brutal admission standards, and its experimental curriculum that regularly paired cadets with creatures that had once hunted their kind for sport. It was not known for inviting species with reputations for unpredictability. And humans? They were still the biggest question mark in the room. The instructor, a towering ridgeback Cyrexan named Vekrul, moved to the center of the behavioral ring, flanked by two armored handlers holding a writhing, mesh-covered crate. The students leaned forward, spines twitching, frills fluttering, ears alert. Even Theo sat up straighter. "Today," Vekrul said, "you will meet the Drakth cub." Half the room flinched, the other half hissed in curiosity. It is not tame, it cannot be domesticated, it does not imprint. Its venom paralyzes the heart muscle within 47 seconds if untreated. This demonstration is to calibrate your survival instincts. Theo blinked slowly. A few cadets cast furtive glances over their shoulders, checking to make sure he was still behind them. The crate was lowered into the ring, the mesh peeled back. Something low and serpentine unfurled itself with a hiss, barbed tail twitching. The Drakth cub was only knee-high, but its presence hit like a thunderclap. Soot-black scales glistened under the observation lights, and its 6 narrow eyes blinked in uneven succession. The instructor continued, voice flat. "You will not approach, you will not provoke, you will observe, and you will respect its nature." At that moment, the Drakth's yellow eyes locked on Theo's. And then, with deliberate, liquid grace, it padded past every alien in the circle, ignoring their recoiling limbs, their wary stares, and walked straight toward the human. Theo didn't move. The room stiffened. A pale furred journey cadet made a noise like air being sucked through a cracked mask. The Drakth stopped at Theo's boots. Its nose twitched. Then, without warning, it sat back on its haunches, let out a soft, raspy churr, and rubbed its fanged snout against Theo's chest. The Academy's top xenopsych cadets, all trained in behavioral science, stared like they'd just watched gravity reverse itself. Theo barely breathed. His arms were still at his sides, palms open. The Drakth pressed closer, head nudging under his chin. Then, impossibly, it let out a low-frequency rumble purring. The sound vibrated through the floor. "Instructor?" someone whispered. Vekrul stepped forward, the tension in his posture visible even under his plated torso harness. "Cadet Malik, do not move." "I'm not," Theo said quietly. His voice wasn't smug or surprised, just measured. He had that same look he always wore in class, like he was 2 thoughts away from saying something no one wanted to hear. The Drakth flicked its tail around his ankle and purred louder. "Is this a threat display?" one of the Colin cadets hissed. "This frequency, it's disarming my cranial harmonics." "I said do not move," Vekrul barked, but his voice faltered as the Drakth licked the side of Theo's neck. The human's face twitched. A wet stripe of saliva shimmered just under his jaw. "Instructor," Theo said slowly, "I think I just got—" Then he stumbled. The Drakth whined, rising onto its hind legs to nudge him upright. Theo's knees buckled. His right hand tried to grip the observation rail behind him, but missed. His fingers weren't working. The left side of his face was slack. Vekrul roared for medical assistance. Theo sank to the floor, the Drakth curled against him protectively, still purring. His voice slurred as he mumbled, "I'm fine. This happens." It took 4 biotechs in full anti-venom gear to extract him. The Drakth growled at every one of them. One of the handlers was scratched, not bitten, just scratched and still had to be sedated. When they carried Theo out, his eyes were half-lidded, lips pale, breathing shallow. The classroom remained in stunned silence. The medbay was designed for triage, not human-specific emergencies. A Code Amber override was triggered, summoning xenomedical consultants from 3 separate wings. By the time they stabilized him, Theo had partial limb paralysis in the left arm and hand, visible swelling in the lymph node clusters under his jaw, and a developing respiratory suppression pattern. His blood pressure was low but stable, and he was drifting in and out of shallow consciousness. "I need more time with the enzyme profile," one of the Varelian doctors muttered, examining his blood work. "The Drakth's venom is bonding differently to human nerve endings. These pain response markers don't match predicted models." "Will he recover?" "Yes," the doctor said, but with a caveat. "Eventually, he'll need antitoxins, oxygenated therapy, nutrient infusions, and neuromuscular reconditioning. No physical exertion for at least a week, maybe longer." Vekrul stood outside the observation window, arms crossed, jaw tight. He let it lick him. "He did not provoke the contact," the medical officer corrected. "It approached him. That has never happened before." Theo regained full consciousness 16 hours later. He couldn't feel his left fingers. There was a monitor chirping next to him, and a nutrient feed slowly dripping into his bloodstream. His throat felt dry, and his shoulder itched beneath the immobilization wrap. He tried to sit up, but his legs didn't respond well. A soft assist strap retracted from the cot and gently lifted his torso for him. He sighed. "Yeah, thought so." A nurse entered a 3-limbed Turalin, efficient and expressionless. "Cadet Malik, you are stable. Please do not attempt unsupported movement." "I wasn't." "You were attempting it poorly." He smiled weakly. "You sound like my old Earth biology teacher. You will begin physical therapy at cycle shift. Muscle tone must be preserved." The Turalin adjusted the assist band at his waist. "You will use this for mobility until neurofunction returns." Theo glanced down at the hover assist harness strapped to his chest and groaned. "I look like a wheeled backpack." "You will look alive. That is the objective." "Fair enough." Over the next few days, he was poked, scanned, monitored, and fitted with an anti-venom drip that left him with mild nausea but brought back enough finger mobility to hold a cup. His breathing improved after 2 days. The neck swelling went down on day 3. Walking, though even with the harness, was exhausting. He had to sit down every 10 meters. By the end of day 4, he could dress himself again, but his left shoulder throbbed if he moved it too fast, and his balance wasn't fully back. When the instructor visited on the 5th day, Theo was practicing slow range of motion exercises on his cot. "Cadet Malik," Vekrul said, voice unreadable. "The Drakth has not eaten since your removal. It is pacing and vocalizing. This is affecting the rest of the behavioral wing." Theo paused mid-lift. "Did it bite anyone else?" "No, but it continues to request your presence. Repeatedly." Theo blinked. "It's requesting me?" "With excessive noise." Silence stretched between them. "Do you know why it approached you?" Vekrul finally asked. Theo exhaled. "I have a guess." The instructor waited. But Theo didn't answer right away. He reached for a padded exercise ball and began slowly rolling it under his palm, his fingers flexing with effort. He winced as a muscle tensed near the elbow. "I used to have a wolf dog," he said softly. "Back on Earth. Big, anxious thing. We rescued him from a backyard breeder who kept him in a metal cage." He paused. "Took months before he let me sit near him. You can't force trust into something like that. You wait. You let them choose." Vekrul said nothing. His ridges were unreadable. Theo looked up, eyes clear. "This isn't new for us. Humans have been domesticating dangerous animals for tens of thousands of years. We live with creatures that can crush us in our sleep, big cats, venomous snakes, even things with claws like that Drakth. We don't just tame them, we build relationships with them." "You are saying this is instinctual?" the Cyrexan asked, incredulous. Theo smiled faintly. "No, I'm saying it's learned. We sit still, we give warmth, we let them choose. That's how trust works." Vekrul stared at him a long moment, then nodded once, curtly, and left. Outside, Academy officials were already in heated debate over containment protocols, psychological anomalies, and species interaction boundaries. Inside, Theo lowered the ball and leaned back, eyes closed. The monitor next to his bed blinked a steady green rhythm. Somewhere in the containment wing, a predator was purring. The Drakth was waiting when they wheeled Theo into the xenofaunal wing for observation. It was enclosed in a curved habitat dome floor, layered with thermal pads, meat slates, and scattered enrichment puzzles that looked mostly gnawed through. A transparent barrier separated it from the walkway, reinforced with micromagnetic locking bars and venom-suppressant mist emitters that hissed softly every few seconds. It ignored all of it. When the hover assist harness lowered Theo onto the waiting bench outside the enclosure, the Drakth lifted its head, whined, and patted to the glass. Its tail flicked sharply. It churred. "Is it supposed to be vocalizing like that?" Theo asked the junior handler beside him, a soft-shelled Avixi cadet who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "No," the Avixi admitted. "It's not even in the known frequency band for juveniles." Theo's eyes met the creature's. The Drakth pressed its scaled head to the glass. "Well," Theo murmured, "guess we both flunked expectations." He stood slowly, every joint in his left side aching. With effort, he shuffled forward and sat cross-legged on the floor near the barrier. The Drakth churred again and laid down, mirroring his posture, its breath fogging the transparent divider between them. Two other cadets from species Theo didn't recognize stopped in the corridor to watch, whispering to each other in clicks and ultrasonic pulses. He didn't bother trying to translate. They weren't subtle. It had been 6 days since the incident. He was walking now barely, but couldn't keep it up long without assistance. His left arm had recovered some strength, but trembled when he reached too far. Eating still took effort. The Drakth, though, was in perfect health. It had been administered a suppressant collar shortly after his collapse, a thin ring embedded with venom inhibitors and a tracking node. It didn't seem to mind. In fact, it refused to remove it, even when offered the chance. Its aggression levels were down. It had rejected food until 3 days ago, when handlers brought in a piece of Theo's old shirt and left it near the feeding zone. It ate immediately. Vekrul's visits to the dome became more frequent after that. So did the whispers. One morning, a Vrith linguistics professor, 8 feet tall and armored like a glacial beetle, stopped Theo in the corridor and asked, "Did you chemically lure it?" "No." "Neurological manipulation?" "No." "Hypnotic frequency?" "Nope." The Vrith blinked both inner and outer eyelids. "Then how?" I sat still. The alien left, muttering. The Academy issued a formal report the next day, classifying the Drakth as a therapeutic fauna asset under controlled observation. It was assigned to Theo's quarters during non-class hours, under 3 layers of medical oversight and constant biosignal logging. Its new tag read, Specimen 88, MZL. Theo called it Muzzle. The name stuck. The day Theo returned to advanced xenofaunal psychology, no one sat in front of him. The instructors hadn't said a word about the incident. No praise, no reprimand. Just a quiet slot on the schedule marked Reintroduction Seminar. Voluntary attendance encouraged. Every cadet came anyway. Vekrul stood at the front, silent, as Theo entered with slow, careful steps, muzzle padding silently beside him. The Drakth wore its suppressant collar and stayed close, occasionally glancing at Theo's knees to match his speed. Whispers followed them. Theo ignored them and sat. Muzzle curled at his feet without hesitation. Vekrul cleared his throat, a low rumble that made the walls hum. "We resume today with interactive simulations of predator stress behavior." A Colon cadet raised a clawed hand. "Before that, may we inquire further into Cadet Malik's interaction?" The instructor hesitated, then looked at Theo. Theo shifted in his seat. "If you're asking how I did it, I didn't. Muzzle did." "You did not imprint it?" "No." "Bond through touch?" "No, it approached me." "Why?" Theo shrugged. "I think it recognized something familiar." The classroom fell still. He continued, "Where I come from, we live alongside creatures that can kill us. Some do, but most don't. Because we learn, and they learn. Wolves became dogs. Jungle cats became companions. We don't force them into submission. That's a quick way to get hurt. We teach them safety by being safe." "You were paralyzed," another cadet said. Theo nodded. "Yeah, it happens." He looked down at his still trembling hand. "I didn't flinch. Not because I'm fearless, because fear would have triggered it. I've dealt with this kind of thing before. It's about predictability." Muzzle stirred, let out a breath, and settled again. The classroom didn't erupt into applause. No one shouted admiration. But something shifted. The instructor nodded once and resumed the lesson. That evening, a message pinged Theo's tablet. Vrith faculty request, Cadet Malik. Your presence is requested in the subterranean habitat bay. One of the cave stalker specimens is refusing to eat. Medical observation required. Instructor Braxlin will meet you. He stared at it for a long moment. His shoulder still ached when he lifted his left arm too high. He accepted. The subterranean bay was colder, darker, and humid enough to choke on. Muzzle trotted quietly at his side, unconcerned. Instructor Braxlin was a shriveled, translucent vrith with long, spindly fingers and a permanent squint. He barely acknowledged Theo before waving him to the holding crate. Inside was a six-legged cave stalker, smaller than an adult, but not by much. Its carapace was dulled with stress, and it pressed itself into the corner with an audible growl. It hasn't eaten in 47 cycles, Braxlin said. Refuses all contact. Normally we'd sedate and administer nourishment, but its immune system is already compromised. We're out of options. You want me to try something? Theo guessed. I want you to be less useless than our veterinarians. Theo crouched slowly, ignoring the pull in his healing shoulder, and watched the creature. Open the gate, just a little. The vrith made a noise that might have been a protest, but complied. Theo didn't reach in. He just sat, breathing slow and deep, posture relaxed. Muzzle sat beside him, mimicking his stillness. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The cave stalker blinked its sideways eyes. Clicked once. Muzzle clicked back. Theo smiled. Good boy. The stalker edged closer. 1 step, then 2. Then its snout emerged from the opening. Muzzle didn't move. The stalker exhaled and dropped its head. It made a whimpering sound. Theo didn't move until it gently rested a single clawed foot on the floor outside the crate. All right, he whispered. Now we feed. By the time he left the habitat bay, Braxlin hadn't said a word. But 2 hours later, a request came through. Cadet Malik, to consult on xenofaunal stress response curriculum redesign. He stared at the message and exhaled through his nose. It had begun. Not everyone was thrilled. Rumors spread quiet at first, then louder, that humans had evolved to manipulate other species, that Theo was genetically altered, that Muzzle had been drugged. Someone filed a formal complaint that his presence in predator studies was psychologically contaminating. Theo didn't respond to any of it. He showed up to class, answered questions when asked, did his therapy, rested when he had to. One evening, an Arxan cadet approached him at the hydration station. Arxans were built like plated tanks, with hardened spinal ridges and clawed hands designed for climbing sheer rock. This one had burn scars on his forearms. A war veteran. He didn't introduce himself. I want to help study the predators, he said. I think I can learn from you. Theo blinked. Why? Because I watched you almost die, the Arxan said. And you didn't panic. You didn't posture. You just let the thing decide. I want to learn that. Theo nodded. All right. They spent the next 3 sessions working together on a hostile aquatic species that could mimic distress signals. The Arxan was clumsy at first, too stiff, too reactive. But on the 3rd day, he sat still long enough for the creature to approach. It bumped his elbow. He didn't move. Progress. By the end of the 3rd week, Theo's recovery had plateaued. He was walking unassisted. The hover harness was stored away. His arms still lacked full strength, but his hand could grasp and lift again. His lungs no longer wheezed after short climbs. Muzzle followed him everywhere. It slept at the foot of his bed, curled in a tight coil. It was still a predator, still capable of killing, but it no longer hissed at passers-by. Its pupils widened in crowded rooms. It would blink slowly at new cadets, and sometimes, if they sat quietly long enough, it would let them offer a finger to sniff. The Academy's most feared creature had learned to nap, and it did so beside a human. The day the Galactic Newsnet picked up Theo's story, he was dissecting a training log with his Arxan partner and eating nutrient bars with his offhand. Muzzle was sprawled at his feet like a scaled, fang-laden rug. The holodisplay beside them flickered with sharp-edged text in over 40 languages. Human male tames unbondable Drakth. Academy divided over behavioral anomaly, therapeutic fauna, or biological threat. Species disagree over muzzle's reclassification. Chaos bonding, new evolutionary strategy, or just luck? Experts disagree. Theo scowled mid-chew. I never called it taming. The Arxan, whose name was Garvex, snorted, which sounded like a garbage compactor swallowing a bolt. Next they'll say, you sang it a lullaby. They already did. In the Zentari edition. They both turned back to the habitat enclosure, where a juvenile Skrellian behemoth, a species prone to spontaneous frenzies, was tentatively nudging a suspended enrichment sphere. Muzzle raised his head slightly and blinked once. The Skrellian went still, then slowly resumed its activity. Garvex tilted his head. So, are you actually doing something? Pheromones? Micro-signaling? Theo flexed his left hand carefully. I think I just don't treat them like monsters. You treat them like friends? No, he said, like equals. That gave Garvex pause. For a hardened soldier who had watched apex creatures tear apart frontline medics during the border wars, the idea that you could equal something with a maw full of bone hooks was unsettling. And yet, here he was, holding a behavioral feedback device and sipping tea beside a man who once almost died doing exactly that. The academy, meanwhile, was fracturing in miniature. Cadets divided into quiet factions. Some began mimicking Theo's method: stillness, patience, calm heart rate exposure, only to find that some predators responded surprisingly well. Others rejected it entirely, calling it biochemical recklessness and emotional exposure beyond species limits. One instructor demanded a full neural analysis of Theo's brain, certain there was a hidden chemical dampener at play. Vekrul shut that request down. He passed every neurobasal screening before entrance. That didn't stop the speculation. Some believed Theo was part of a Quiet Earth initiative to integrate weaponized empathy into diplomacy. Others thought he was lying. And a few, very few, began wondering if it wasn't manipulation at all. Maybe it was adaptation. 2 weeks after the incident, Theo's arm was mostly functional again. He still had to limit strain and avoid hard impact, but he could grip, lift, and type without shaking. The venom suppressant had cleared his system, and the inflammation markers in his lymph nodes were back within normal range. The academy officially marked him medically cleared for moderate activity. He marked it as tired of being treated like a loaded experiment. That week, Instructor Vekrul invited him to a faculty colloquium. No students, no handlers, just a private demonstration with a new species for the research logs. Theo hesitated. Cadet Malik, Vekrul said flatly, you may decline. I'll come, Theo replied, but only if Muzzle comes too. The colloquium was held in one of the inner biodomes, a tightly sealed observation unit with multiple redundancy gates and trauma response drones waiting in the rafters. The creature inside was a Hellcraw viper wolf, long-bodied, four-legged, and jittering with sensory overload, its color-shifting hide rippled with shifting hues of distress. 3 instructors stood behind the reinforced viewing panel, watching silently. Theo entered the biodome alone. Muzzle stayed just outside the second gate, watching with quiet alertness. No tools. No protective gear. Just a softly humming biodome and the blur of a nervous predator circling the outer edge. Theo didn't approach it. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, eyes unfocused, breathing steady. The viper wolf darted left-right, then froze. It circled him 3 times, just outside his reach. His pulse rose, but he didn't show it. It sniffed. Then, suddenly, it lay down. Not close, not touching, but it lay down. Theo exhaled and looked up at the viewing panel. Vekrul met his eyes. No one said anything. They didn't have to. When the clip leaked to the interstellar forums, there were fewer jokes this time. Fewer memes. Fewer headlines treating it like a fluke. Instead, the analysis began. Detailed frame-by-frame breakdowns, motion mapping, heart rate data from Theo's medical patch, acoustic logs, environmental pressure graphs, even predictions on scent molecule transmission based on assumed human biology. One Golaran professor called it the first evidence of non-verbal cross-species harmonic regulation. Another, less formally, said, the human is making eye contact with predators and they're calming down. I don't even know what that means. By the third month, Theo was no longer the human. He was Theo. Still the first of his kind to attend, still living under a quiet cloud of suspicion but no longer alone. Cadets from 4 different species asked him to help with advanced fauna studies. A Takriti cadet with 12 separate vocal registers developed a neural harmonics monitor based on Theo's sessions. An aquatic dronari invited him to observe an underwater predator that had refused to accept visual interaction until Theo swam in and sat at the bottom of the tank, eyes closed, for 20 minutes. It approached him, nudged his leg, then hovered beside him for the next hour. A Vrith student cried when their assigned predator finally accepted food from their hand after copying Theo's method. Small shifts. Muzzle became a fixture. The once feared Drakth cub was now a presence in the halls, tagged, suppressed, and closely monitored, yes, but not feared. Students whispered its name with hesitant fondness. Some asked if they could pet it. Theo always said the same thing. If it chooses. Sometimes it did. Instructor Vekrul observed the change with quiet discomfort. During a mid-cycle review, he asked bluntly, "Do you believe this method of yours is scalable?" Theo considered. "No, not like this. I'm not offering a shortcut. Just a reminder." Of what? Not everything that can kill us wants to. Vekrul's silence was unreadable. Theo didn't press. Late one evening, after an exhausting class run and 3 habitat sessions in a row, Theo sat in his dorm with a heat pad on his shoulder and muzzle curled up near the radiator vent. His communicator pinged. Incoming message. "Are you still dangerous? Anonymous." He stared at it. Then typed back. Only to assumptions. He powered down the device and let his head fall back against the wall. Muzzle purred softly in his sleep, a low vibration that no longer sent alien cadets into cardiac alert. Just a rumble. Soft. Honest. Safe. It was raining the day of the final practicals. Which was strange, since the Galactic Behavioral Integration Academy didn't have rain. Not naturally. The planetary climate was strictly controlled, down to the minute humidity balances in the outdoor enclosures. But the environmental engineering cadets had voted unanimously to simulate planetary discomfort as a variable in predator response evaluations. Someone from the Earth contingent suggested rain. The others, reluctantly intrigued, agreed. So now the entire East Campus smelled like wet circuits and ionized pollen, and everything outside had the slick sheen of documentary footage. Theo stood at the observation deck, soaked to the ribs, muzzle blinking slowly beside him as mist rose off its heat-retaining scales. "Smells like Earth," Theo muttered. Garvex, standing nearby, sniffed. "Smells like a rusting air filter." Close enough. The final exercise of the semester was underway, a rotating sequence of species assigned to high-reactivity fauna, graded not on control but on outcome, safety, emotional regulation, trust under stress. The kind of test Theo had been quietly performing since the day he arrived. This time, though, his name wasn't in the outlier section of the exam sheet. It was on the teaching roster. Cadet Malik will observe and advise, Vekrul had announced a week prior without looking at him, on behavioral trust calibration. No one protested. A few even nodded. And now they were here, alien cadets soaked and shivering, crouching beside cage gates, whispering soft encouragements, or simply breathing through the tension as apex creatures circled warily nearby. Some failed. A few were hissed at. Others saw their assigned fauna reject interaction entirely. But more than a few succeeded. Theo watched a pale-shelled Threxian sit, spine folded tightly, while a cave lurker sniffed their antennae and settled beside them. He watched Garvex, once all harshness and posture, offer his open palms to a pack-bred stalker that tested his scent before nuzzling his leg. They'd all been watching, listening, trying. The shift in the academy hadn't come with ceremony. No announcements, no banners, just small ripples, spreading quietly. Trust wasn't taught in lectures, it was learned. One sit, one breath, one choice at a time. Later, during cool-down and cleanup, a Vrith cadet approached Theo as he toweled off under the archway. "Is it always this slow?" she asked. "What is?" Getting something to stop seeing you as a threat. Theo considered. If you're lucky. She nodded. And if you're not? He looked over at Muzzle, who was chasing rivulets of water down the metal floor with the giddy concentration of a toddler. Then you work harder. When the semester closed, the Academy held its standard non-denominational end-cycle gathering, a blend of speeches, acknowledgments, and carefully neutral snacks that wouldn't trigger anyone's species' specific allergy profiles. Theo stood at the back, sipping something lukewarm and mildly fluorescent, watching a group of cadets try to explain Earth pizza to a confused nutrition specialist. Garvex was laughing. Vekrul was not. Muzzle, of course, had its own clearance badge now. The collar stayed on. Not everyone was comfortable, but no one doubted its place. And when the Drakth cub slithered into the hall and curled up next to Theo's leg without hesitation, no one backed away. Not anymore. Someone snapped a photo. Theo groaned. There's going to be another article, isn't there? Garvex smirked. Already is. The title is Man and Monster, or Just Mammals. Theo snorted. Catchy. Confused a lot of the insectoids. After the last speech, after the refreshments had vanished and the cleanup drones began their quiet sweep of the hall, Theo stepped outside. The rain simulation had ended, but the air still carried its echo. The sky shimmered in artificial twilight, stars projected above for ambiance. Muzzle was at his side, quiet now, still alert, but calmer than it had ever been. Theo sank down onto the bench near the edge of the courtyard and exhaled, slowly, like he hadn't let himself fully relax in weeks. A figure approached, tall, armored. Vekrul. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, watching the simulated constellations. Finally, he said, the Drakth species was considered neurologically incapable of forming bonds, incapable of calming its autonomic kill response. Theo nodded. I have updated that classification. Glad I could help. Vekrul's gaze stayed forward. What you've done here, it doesn't fit our models. No, Theo agreed, but it fits ours. The Cyrexan shifted, only slightly. I still do not fully understand how it is possible. Theo reached down, brushing his fingers over Muzzle's snout. The creature leaned into the contact, letting out a deep, slow rumble. I don't think it's something to understand, Theo said. It's something to respect. A long silence stretched between them. Then Vekrul said, You'll return next term? I've been cleared. There will be others. Theo looked at him. Other humans, Vekrul clarified. Now that the results are being documented. Theo nodded slowly. Then I guess I'll have to make room. Will they be like you? He smiled, faintly. Some better, some worse. But all of them will care. That's what we do. We care first, even when we shouldn't, especially when it hurts. He flexed his hand, the one that had been paralyzed. Still tight some mornings, still sore after long sessions. But functional. He had worked for that. Muzzle nudged his knee. I was wrong about your species, Vekrul said, unexpectedly. You are not parasites. You are not apex predators. Theo raised an eyebrow. Then what are we? Vekrul's voice was low, thoughtful. You are bridges. The legend of the human who calmed the uncalmable didn't fade after the semester ended. It was translated, interpreted, mocked, mythologized, rewritten in a dozen tongues across the galaxy. Some versions made Theo into a prophet, others a genetic fluke. A few didn't mention him at all, just a human-shaped silhouette, sitting quietly in a circle of teeth. But the cadets who had been there knew. They'd seen the way Muzzle curled up beside him, the way Theo never reached first, the way he let even monsters decide. They'd watched the quiet war between fear and understanding play out in real time, and they hadn't forgotten. Some began programs on their homeworlds. Trust protocols, they called them. Others changed their predator training entirely. And a few, quietly, secretly requested to be stationed with humans on diplomatic posts. Because humans, it turned out, weren't just anomalies. They were reminders that you didn't always have to fear what had claws. Sometimes, you just had to sit still long enough and let it choose you.